hopefully a person event for Sukkot with, like I said, our wine and cheese, which last year we did do. We did it online, and we sent around wines to everybody who and they had to pay for it now, with a wine and cheese platter and the wine. It came out really cool. This year we're not going to charge for it, and we'll be able to come. So I'm really hoping we can do that in person. It's been a long time tradition, so we're working on that. We're working on some other stuff outdoors for Sukkot. It is the perfect holiday for us to keep everybody safe, but still do stuff outside. And I'm hoping, God willing, by then that we will be in a better place. This last week was just a horrible week on so many levels. It was just a terrible week. And hopefully this week will be better, and every other week between now as we begin a new year. I hope we get all the bad stuff out before the new year starts. And it is starting. It's starting, whether I like it or not. 2 weeks from today, it'll be Rosh Hashanah and the beginning of the new year. So Monday night, we're having services, hopefully again in person for a limited group of people. The information, the tickets, the stuff, if you want to reserve, is now up online. And then Tuesday morning, we're going to do a live event, a live service again at Valencia United Methodist Church, both the evening and the morning. And then the next day, if you really don't want to be inside, we came up with an idea to do an outdoor tashlich / shofar service outside. So if people want to hear the sound of the shofar but didn't want to come in to a inside building, which I completely understand, and given that a shofar looks like literally the best means of spreading disease, we're going to do it outside at the Bridgeport market.
You got a CPK after for lunch, right?
Didn't say. I'm not I'm not promoting any restaurants, but yes, it's a nice restaurant, maybe to get a super salad afterwards. I don't know. A good way to start the new year.
How about a pepperoni pizza?
Pepperoni. They have, by the way, they have veggie barbecue chicken pizza there now, by the way. It's not my favorite veggie stuff, but it's still pretty cool that they finally have that. So yeah, there's good stuff on the horizon. I'm really hoping that by giving people some outdoor options, we had a lot of people that were requesting indoor stuff too. Well, not that they were requesting indoors, but they wanted to have services.
So Rabbi, do you have to reserve your spot if you're going to go come?
Yes. So on the online tickets, when you order the ticket, you put down which service you're going to go to. Mike, I'm really pretty sure that we're going to be able to accommodate everybody and still be safe. But yeah, it'll be.
I skimmed the email yesterday and I didn't see that. So
yeah, when you go online and actually get the tickets, there's a.
I didn't know you have to get the tickets either. Okay.
There's a box. There's a link to it, and then there's a box for it. So.
And it was so good to see Reverend Lynn today.
Yes, Reverend Lynn is there.
Have you been?
Like everybody else.
Yeah. You're alive though, so that's all that matters. You're here.
It's just too much. Yeah.
It's a lot. There was a lot. By the end of last week, I really felt like I got kicked. Yeah. Plus I was sick last week. I think some people noticed that last Tuesday and Wednesday.
You sound like you had a cold.
Yeah, I had a little cold, which was, I haven't been sick in 2 years because everyone's wearing masks and we're not seeing each other. So I haven't
okay, Rabbi, I have your cold.
That's not a good sign. But anyway.
I think I got it last Wednesday night.
But I did see you Saturday night. Listen,
but I woke up with it Sunday. So
we shared food and everything.
I didn't share your food.
Anyways, but I felt terrible because you can't have a cold anymore. During COVID, it's the scarlet letter, man. You have a cough or a sneeze, and honestly, people look at you like it's kind of weird. It's kind of funny actually, but I had a little bit of a cough last week, and but I'm feeling like today is the first day I got up and just felt really good. But I'm just telling you, it was working real hard, and it just caught up with me, when
we left Saturday, Rabbi, I forgot to take Ryder with me. I'm sorry.
Yes, our dog was with us at the park. He had a great day. He was tired the next day, so that was good. But I will tell you, it was great seeing a lot of you. The Steins got there.
And Jeff.
The
Good
Steins
to
got
see
there
Jeff.
just as we said goodbyes. The Steins showed up, but it was really nice seeing everybody. The Fuchsmans were there for a good chunk of time. They left before a lot of people got there, and yeah, the only person who really wasn't there was Judith, who was probably actually in Ventura and just didn't.
No. I was here.
She was there the next day. She was on the boat the next day. Anyways, we have an interesting thing that's happening right now too in our class for all those who are here. We're coming to the end. We're actually coming to the end of this journey that's been going on for 5 or 6 years now, like 5 years, almost 6 years. So we had a discussion, some of us, about what to transition into now, because we're coming. What was interesting is when we started this journey with the Midrash, we didn't start at the beginning of a section, if you will. We didn't start with a beginning of a book or even like a section of the Tanakh. We didn't start with the prophets, or we started kind of midway. And what we did is we started with the Torah portion of the week, which was the story of the spies. And we're coming back around to that section, which was kind of a weird place to start from the standpoint of it wasn't like necessarily like a great narrative moment. It's actually, of course, one of the darkest moments in Jewish history. But what was interesting, it was a really good place to start because we really have been on a journey with the text over these last years, and that's what that section's about. It's also to kind of help us learn what not to do when we're confronted with a journey like that. And it ended up being a really interesting, when we came back around a few months ago, or actually about a year ago, to Genesis, we were, it's taken us about a year to get from Genesis back to this point. So we didn't start at the beginning. We didn't start at Genesis. So the next thing that we're going to do in this group is we're actually going to go into, not back to the Torah, but we're actually going to go to the next book of the Bible, the book of Joshua, which we haven't studied for a very long time. And then we're going to go into Judges. What's interesting about it is we've looked at it in more recently from the Midrash. And so we haven't had a chance to kind of familiarize ourselves or kind of read or learn the bigger stories, the stories that the rabbis wanted to touch on in Midrash, though we did Joshua Midrash a long time ago. I don't expect anyone to remember that because it was about 4 or 5 years ago. But we're going to come back on those stories from the text itself and look at what Joshua, Judges, and Samuel have to say. And interestingly, in the last few years since the last time we looked at those books, there have been some really great books that have come out that have touched on those other texts. There's always new research and scholarship. But there still is a kind of a lack of understanding of those books, even within the Jewish community, because they're not necessarily. Well, first of all, Joshua and Judges in particular are not the highlight or the high point of Jewish history from the standpoint of it's part of it was calm and there wasn't a lot happening, and part of it was not good. But the high point events, which really don't start until we get to King David, people touch more on those than they do on those stories that we get from Joshua and Judges. One of the really cool things is every year at Rosh Hashanah, and oftentimes Judith is actually reading this section for us, is the section that we read from the book of Samuel on the birth of Samuel. And that's one of the few stories from those pre-David texts that we do know, or that we familiarize ourselves with. But again, because most of the Haftarot don't come from that section, there are a few that come from Joshua and Judges, the story of Jephthah, the story of Samson. Those are a little bit more well-known, but a lot of those stories people really don't know. They're not familiar with. And that goes for the Jewish community as well. Orthodox Jews, Jews that study Torah regularly or study Talmud regularly, they really don't know those books very well. There's a complete almost gap of knowledge of those books within traditional Jewish circles. So they're interesting to read. Again, a lot of Jews haven't read them or haven't read them well. And And they're interesting from the standpoint of, again, almost uncovering things that a lot of people don't know about. And so it'll be interesting to do that. So we'll be starting that in just a few weeks, just after the new year. We'll be starting that. And I'm hoping at some point we'll be able to go back into the synagogue. We were there yesterday working on installation of the projector and the screen to allow us to project anybody who's there virtually with us, so that people can join us. You don't have to be there, and you also could be around the corner and still be on your computer. I mean, Jeff Stein is actually now here in Santa Clarita. It was much more exotic when he was in Colorado. But Jeff Stein could conceivably be on Silver King and still be in our classroom if he woke up late one day and wanted to join us. So that the installation of that screen is the bigger part. The installation of the projector itself was pretty easy, but the screen is a little bit harder to get in there, because we wanted to put it flat. It's not done yet, so that's the last piece. But that's the only thing left that we really need to do before we come in and get in. But again, I think we're
and the HVAC system.
Yes, well, we're delaying it a little bit because of the spike in illness right now, and we are. I mean, as much as everybody wants to come back together, we really have to be careful. And there are a lot of people that are really battling illness right now. Until I think we come up with this next. We've heard very good things from Israel about the third booster shot. My guess is that over the next month, most of us who've been vaccinated for 6 months will be back in getting our booster. They've had very good efficacy with the in the studies that they've done on people who've gotten the boosters in Israel. But I got news for you: Israel is getting slammed right now. They had I think almost 10,000 new cases yesterday, and they have an 80% vaccination.
Did I also see, Mark, that Israel is developing an oral treatment?
Yes, but that's not going to help. I mean, I don't think it's going to help us. But right now, yeah, it could help us next year. But right now, I'm just to get through the end of the year. I think all of us are going to be probably getting another shot, and gosh, I hope it works. But we have around the corner. I mentioned last week, one of our neighbors, Michael Moses, has been battling on a ventilator at Henry Mayo. This last Sunday, our friend from Galpin, a member of our community, and we're just praying for his health. He's been really. It's been a very touch and go situation, and Michael's a wonderful guy, a wonderful heart, and hopefully he'll be able to fight. But yeah, the Henry Mayo has been slammed. Every hospital in our county is dealing with how to do it. We're much better at it than we were last year, obviously, but it's very bad out there. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't want to scare people, and I don't want to give people things to be worried about. But we definitely want to make sure that we're not contributing to the problem at our synagogue. So, as much as I'm working on trying to make sure people can be together, I'm also at the same time doing everything I can to make sure we're not going to jeopardize people's health. So that being said,
All Saints in Pasadena has had in-person worship as well as online worship for about 3 or 4 weeks, but everyone inside and out, anywhere on the campus, has to be masked.
Yeah.
Inside or out.
Well, that is what we're going to have. I mean, we didn't have that at the beach, but we are going to have it at the church, and we put that out on everything that everyone, vaccinated or not, will be masked. But I got to.
Well, there are too many children. I mean, among other things, but people who can't be vaccinated, like little children and others. So we have to be careful.
Yeah. And we are planning on having a kids service, and but we're going to keep them separate. We're going to try to we're going to do our best. but it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough year. So,
Hello.
so we're going to get, we're going to get started. We have both of our readers are here today, Judith and Rosemary. We haven't had you both here for a long time. Actually, it's been a few weeks since both of you were here, but
Okay.
we're going to finish up with this section that we've been reading over the last few weeks, which is dealing with the book of Numbers and the people complaining about the Israelites complaining. What we're about to get into is the fact that the Moses' own family is about to start complaining. And that's what we're going to, I don't know that we'll get there today, but what we finished with last week was the appointment of the 70 elders and the fact that there are representatives that are chosen to help Moses here. The Torah tells us that, but the Midrash kind of asks the question, well, what happened to the elders before? What happened to the people that were supposed to be helping Moses this whole way? And so what we learn is that some of those, so this is essentially a second selection, a second appointment. And the first group did not fare well. And so we went through this last week. We went through the list of the people that were appointed, 6 from each tribe. 2 actually didn't get in, which would, again, 72. The two that don't go in are from the tribe of the Levites. They only get 4, but of course they really get 2 because they have Moses and Aaron, who are both Levites, who are pretty much, can't get much higher than them. So those are the 70 people that are put as the prophets. And again, it's really because or leaders they are prophets. They get prophetic gift. And it's really because Moses, as we read last week, kind of says to God, I can't do this anymore by myself. And that's where God says, okay, but I'm going to give your gifts to everybody else. I'm going to give at least some of your gifts to everybody else. And I think, again, as we saw, there's kind of a difference of opinion amongst the rabbis with whether Moses's energy really got diminished, or as they said, one midrash is that no, it's not like that. Moses's spirit was not diminished because he's like a candle. When you light a candle with another candle, it doesn't diminish the light. So Moses didn't have his light diminished. But again, there seems to be this idea that maybe it did, and maybe now, again, as we come now to this part of the journey, this is still pre-spies. So this is still in the first couple of years after we're at the beginning of the journey. This isn't, well, we're about to go completely south, but we haven't gone yet. So where we're reading right now is about these 2 guys that are mentioned, a very curious story in the Torah of Eldad and Medad. And the Torah, this is a Torah story. The Torah tells us that these 2 guys start prophesying once they have the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh. And again, as we said, it seems kind of strange to hear the word Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, coming from Jewish sources, but absolutely, this was a Jewish term before it became a Christian term, and so this is the story of Eldad and Medad, which, again, for those of you following at home, this is from the section of the Torah that is Numbers chapter, I want to say it's about chapter 12, but maybe it's later than that. But we are going to read some interesting things about it here. Yeah, Numbers 11, 24 to 29. Now, I will tell you that this whole concept of Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, and Eldad and Medad, prophesizing and the unities kind of things, these characters did become they became important to Christians. And I will tell you that you will see some of that in the Midrash, maybe. Well, take a look. So, Rosemary, why don't you start with this and the stories of Eldad and Medad and Midrash.
When Moses had completed the appointment of the elders and had asked them to accompany him to the tabernacle, there to receive the Holy Spirit, Eldad and Medad, two of these elders, in their humility, did not obey his summons, but hid themselves, deeming themselves unworthy of this distinction. God rewarded them for their humility by distinguishing them fivefold above the other elders. These prophesied what would take place on the following day, announcing the appearance of the quails. But Eldad and Medad prophesied what was still veiled in the distant future. The elders prophesied only on this one day, but Eldad and Medad retained the gift for life. The elders died in the desert, whereas Eldad and Medad were the leaders of the people after the death of Joshua. The elders are not mentioned by name in the scriptures, whereas these two are called by name. The elders, furthermore, had received the prophetic gift from Moses, whereas Eldad and Medad received it directly from God.
All right, so so we read a list of the people that were the elders, and Eldad and Medad were not in that list. Now that list is not in the Torah. That was a list that the rabbis came up with, the one that we read last week, the one that Rosemary read so beautifully, 70 names.
The one that I wished Judith had been here.
There it is right there.
You did fabulously, Rosemary.
There's the list. And then we have Eldad and Medad are not on that list. So the rabbis clearly set that up so that they would have a situation where they have some people that are prophesizing who are not mentioned. And so then we have this wonderful midrash about why they're not mentioned, which is that they would have been with the group of people that were distinguished, but they didn't want to be part of it because they were humble. And because they were humble, they got extra powers. They didn't just get the gifts that the rest of the 70 got. So you still come up actually to now 72 with Eldad and Medad, not even including Moses and Aaron. So Eldad and Medad are singled out. They're the only ones that are actually mentioned by the Torah. So the rabbis kind of acknowledge that this list that they had, or that we just had, is not in the Torah itself, but they are mentioned. It says they are mentioned. They were singled out by name in the scripture, whereas the others weren't. And it also says that whereas Moses kind of imparted their gifts to them, God actually imparts it directly to them. And so what they get is a different level of power, so that they, for example, when the elders simply talk about the quail coming, which is the next scene, is that the quail comes up and, God punishes the people for asking for food. That was also in last week's Midrash, the commentary on chapter 11, where, the people are saying, well, I don't want manna anymore, and they get the quail. Well, the rest of the elders only saw that. But Eldad and Medad saw beyond, way into the future. They are prophesizing for stuff to the end of days. And so this is where we start to get a little Christological, and it'll sound a little Christological, because again, it comes out of the same types of period and with the same types of issues here, which are, how do they get this power? I mean, how does one start prophesizing, and where does that gift come from? And again, Eldad and Medad get it directly from the Torah. Now, what's interesting about the scene in the Torah is the commentary that happens now. Let me just read you what the Torah says, and then the commentary or the Midrash will make a little bit more sense. So it says, Eldad and Medad, the Torah, I'm reading from the Torah, from chapter 11, verse 27. Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. A young man ran and told Moses. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses, one of his chosen men, said, my Lord Moses, stop them. But Moses said to him, are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and the Lord would put his spirit on them. And Moses and the elders returned to the camp. And that's the end of the story. That's it. And the very famous line that Moses says here is, would it be that all my people are prophets? Which is, it's one of the more powerful lines that ever came out of Moses's mouth, at least that had to do with other people. There's some beautiful things he says about himself and about God. But talking about the people here at this moment in that way is one of the more powerful lines that I remember. It stuck out in my head as a kid when I read about Moses and hearing that line, would that all my people be prophets? And it really is an interesting kind of lesson in leadership, which is, as a religious leader, as a teacher, are you doing your best to make sure that other people can also be teachers and leaders? And are you following Moses's example of literally saying, why are you jealous? I hope everybody can, it would be great if everyone could lead services. It would be great if everyone had, convictions to teach and to minister and to help people and to visit. I mean, this is the challenge of, I think, of religious leadership, kind of in articulated in its best, which is, again, for religious leaders, and I would say, in my experience, since Reverend Lynn is on the line right now, I would say that in my experience, female clergy are much better at empowering their congregants and parishioners and students than male rabbis and ministers and priests are. And so I think this mode of humility and a mode of, again, what are we really trying to do? Should all of our learning and should all of our power, die with us? And so Moses really says, no, Joshua. And again, Joshua is going to be the next leader. So he's really teaching Joshua a message here too, which is, this isn't about you. You're not going to be a successful leader if when you die, no one else can do the job. I wish everyone could do this job. And so this to me is one of the greatest lines, if not the greatest line, that Moses ever spoke. And I think when I learned that as a kid, I learned that Moses really didn't want to be the only one who could speak to God. That's a really beautiful idea. And again, just sit with that for a moment. Just sit with this idea that, again, in my experience, the religious leaders who've really been the best religious leaders have been the people who have not, it's not been about them trying to get the attention. So, yeah, that's a story that a lot of people don't know because it's 4 lines in the Torah, and it's not dramatic. Nobody dies. Nobody gets struck by lightning. But it's to me the mode of religious leadership. And I laugh a little bit because Rosemary was part of the original leadership that hired me as rabbi, and we had some issues of religious leadership when I came, and it was very hard for me because it was one of those moments of we actually had to do things that I theoretically don't like, but we had to do it because that was the only way to do it. And it had to do more with having lay leadership. Ideally, lay leadership is a wonderful thing to have. It just has to be done in a way that is promoting understanding and leadership for everybody. Yes. Yes, this is the yeah. And it's, by the way, it is a huge part of why when Rosemary reads and teaches, or Judith runs a women's retreat, that those are again, those are some of the, for me, the feelings of fulfillment that I get, that it's really makes me feel like I've done my job. I think somebody put it in my mind a long time ago, the way that a rabbi is really successful is to make himself or herself redundant. And I don't mean, again,
Absolutely.
retired redundant like they do in England, but redundant in that it doesn't, that person
Right.
can do it, that person can say it. And I think, in many ways, Reverend Lynn, you were really able to do it. It's difficult because we live in a country where religious leadership is unfortunately been, it's almost become like every other type of leadership, political leadership. It's become a joke, but it is a really serious thing. And it really is ideally the exact opposite of most religious leadership that we see, on television.
I think back to your first comment about women, I think that generally speaking, women tend to be more inclusive than men, which would make it easier for women in positions of leadership to encourage laity to prophesy or to be leaders. I think it's just more difficult for men culturally, socially.
I think women aren't as hierarchical as many men are.
Absolutely. When I was in seminary, we talked about Jacob's ladder for men or Sarah's circle for women. And I think that is generally true.
Yeah. It's one of the great things that has emerged in the last 30 years of women leaders in congregations. And it is, it's interesting to see it'll be interesting to see what will happen 30 or 40 years from now, whether that will have a long lasting effect and have the effect of actually helping the Jewish community regenerate itself. Because a hierarchical system works. I'm not advocating for it. I don't want anybody to say that, like, what I mean. I hope everybody. A hierarchical system works when every system around it is also hierarchical and it all works together,
Right.
that it all functions together. And it shouldn't, but when it does, then it does work. It doesn't work now, and thank God it's not working. But the way for the community, any community, to regenerate is to have leadership that is, again, inclusive, and it allows people to teach and to learn simultaneously. And it really allows for people to kind of emerge as teachers. Again, there has to be some kind of, like, how do we kind of give people the blessing or the imprimatur to be a teacher. But I'm of the mindset that it's much better to be lenient in that than to be a toughie on that. And again, maybe I'll change my mind in another 20 years when I become more curmudgeon-y. But I think that we really do have a lot of women rabbis to thank for the fact that they've literally said, this is only about your ego. Calling people out, and just by example saying, no, you don't have to do it. Like, you don't have to tell people that only these people can be teachers. And so it's even happening, by the way, in the Orthodox world. Just so you know, this isn't just a Reform, conservative, non-Orthodox discussion. It's going on in the Orthodox world, and it's giving I mean, it gives me hope that Judaism as a whole, as a civilization, is going to finally get this. We're going to get back to this. So, yeah, I think for the future, which hopefully will also be, open and not structured as it was, I think we're going to be good. I hope. I mean, that's the good news. So this Eldad and Medad story, as you can see, the rabbis weren't exactly sure what to make of what they were actually saying. So this part is pretty well known in Judaism or traditional Judaism, and you're going to say, what's going on here? But take a look at this next paragraph.
Eldad now began to make prophecies, saying, Moses will die, and Joshua, the son of Nun, will be his successor as leader of the people, whom he will lead into the land of Canaan, and to whom he will give it as a possession. Medad's prophecy was as follows. Quails will come from the sea and will cover the camp of Israel, but they will bring evil to the people. Besides these prophecies, both together announced the following revelation. At the end of days, there will come up out of the land of Magog a king to whom all nations will do homage. Crowned kings, princes, and warriors with shields will gather to make war upon those returned from exile in the land of Israel. But God, the Lord, will stand by Israel in their need and will slay all their enemies by hurling a flame from under his glorious throne. This will consume the souls and the hosts of the king of Magog, so that their bodies will drop lifeless upon the mountains of the land of Israel and will become a prey to the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air. Then will all the dead among Israel arise and rejoice in the good that at the beginning of the world was laid up for them, and will receive the reward for their good deeds.
Wow. Yeah, well, this is the idea that Eldad and Medad were not talking when they prophesied about anything that anybody really would have understood or related to anything that really had to do with, well, so maybe they did talk about the quails, but they really weren't talking about the quails. They were really talking about this idea of Gog and Magog. Look, this Midrash represents a continuity and a tradition that began in the Bible. So it goes back to the Torah, but by the time of the rabbis and by the time of Christianity, there's a whole lot here that we didn't get in the Torah, and so that must have developed during this time. And again, the Midrash gives us one piece of it. Christianity gives us another piece of it. So originally, just to kind of make it clear, Gog and Magog are mentioned in the book of Genesis as in the story of Noah and how the world gets settled. They're mentioned as a king, a person, and an area, and it would be in the kind of the northern regions of the known world, if you will. So probably what would today be modern day Turkey, but it's in the northern part of the known world, Asia Minor, what we call Asia Minor, or maybe even the steppes above Asia Minor, but not that far away probably from Israel, because none of the countries that are mentioned in chapter 10 of Noah are that far away from the Mediterranean region. It basically goes from the Aegean, North Africa, out to Persia. That's it. That's the only parts of the world that are mentioned. But so in the book of Ezekiel, the Gog and Magog are mentioned as rulers, and they appear in Ezekiel as a prophetic, as a scourge on Israel, and that they're going to they're going to destroy Israel. They're going to go to war against Israel. That's in chapter 38 of Ezekiel. So this is this war of Ezekiel, the war of Gog and Magog. And the Ezekiel text was the first text where it's bad, that those areas are bad, and that there will be a war from them. The next texts that we have are these. I mean, probably as far as the historical development, but around this time, and maybe a little bit before, is the fact that this is mentioned, Gog and Magog are mentioned in the book of Revelations as part of the final apocalypse of the world, the end of days. What's interesting about it in the Christian reading, that's the final battle. It's the end of the world. In Jewish eschatology, end of the world discussions, it's not the end of the world. It's the end of bad times, but the beginning of good times. And so it's not that like the world ends at that point, but the Jewish version of the new world, the new order starts. And what happens is that if you read, and this is a pretty good example of what's the difference between Jewish and Christian apocalypse, is that the people still eat, animals still eat. They'll actually eat the bodies of Gog and Magog. And it says their bodies will drop and will become prey to the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air. The animals will eat them. And then what says after that is the dead among Israel will arise and rejoice in the good that at the beginning of the world was laid up for them. And what it's saying is that there was an order essentially from the beginning, from Genesis, where people weren't going to die. And what happens at the end of the world is that, for us, is that it's really the beginning of a new order of what should have been at the beginning, at the very beginning. So we return to Eden, and we return to a time when people don't die. Before we got thrown out of the Garden of Eden, before Adam and Eve and all of Adam and Eve's descendants, all of us, that we don't die anymore. And not only that the dead, those people who died, will arise and will be they'll be resurrected, and they'll come back. And again, this is kind of what existed at the beginning of kind of Christian discussion about resurrection, which is why when Christians read in the Christian Bible these stories about Jesus's body being resurrected, it seems so weird, because like, why? I mean, like, Jesus should be beyond a body by this point. And the issue is that it's so connected still at that point, at the time of the Gospels, at least the early Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, that Jesus's body had to be resurrected, which is why you have doubting Thomas, looking at the actual physical body of Jesus, because Jesus being a spirit wasn't what this was talking about. The end of days was supposed to be people being resurrected in their actual bodies. Their bodies are there, that they have a body. And so Jesus needed to have a body, because everyone resurrected it wasn't just that you're a spirit anymore. You actually are a spirit in a body, and you won't die anymore. So that's why Jesus having a physical body was so important in those gospel narratives, because Jews, this is our Midrash. This is what we taught. We taught that your body is going to be resurrected. So that's why it was so important for him to have a physical body, and that Jesus was the first, but then everybody else, his followers, and that's why they're kind of hopeful, is that he's the first to be resurrected, but that everyone else after him is also, if things go right, if the kingdom of heaven really now starts, we get this new order, that this will happen. So again, during the time of Jesus, it's very possible that a lot of his followers and a lot of Jews at the time thought that Gog and Magog were indeed Rome. They came from the north. They were a unifying country, because what does it say? Every country pays homage to the Magog, to Rome. So like the prophecies worked, and the prophecies probably worked all the way back to Alexander the Great. That's where people first started talking about, this ruler who will rule for everybody. And what's interesting about it from Jewish standpoint is that's not a good thing. This is not a good thing. When all the countries all pay homage to one king, that's like the last straw. That's when everything is going to go to hell, so to speak. And that's when God will intervene, and that's when everything will be good. So unifying this, that's why, again, we have this Midrash. It's why you also have in Christianity, especially very apocalyptic forms of Christianity, this fear of a new world order where every country is going to become unified, whether it's the United Nations, whether it was Soviet Russia, whether it's a new world order, even if it's led by us, that's the Antichrist. And so you get those kinds of things here. And again, it was really interesting because this stuff even exists in the Quran. Early Muslims would look at some of our, I just went from being Jewish to being Western European. So I'm not really, but I like this idea that early Muslims looked at the Vikings as we know they looked at them as Gog and Magog because they knew these stories. They read the Bible and they knew the Midrash. They looked at the Vikings as Gog and Magog because they came from the far north, and they seemed to be completely devoid of any sense of, they were, monstrous size, fighters, and they were pretty scary. So they saw them.
Those are my people.
I know.
Those are my peeps.
They're my people too, by association. I'm a huge Viking fan, as you know. So for the people from Minnesota, those are our people. But I want to say that it's kind of funny that they were seen, or we were seen as the European people were seen as Gog and Magog. So it all depends on your vantage point. Who is Gog and Magog? But I do want to point out again, the Jewish idea is that not that we have to. God kind of fights the battle for us, as you can see. It's God that fights. It's not. We do sometimes have the Messiah fighting. I will say that those do exist. We've seen them before, but most of the time it's God fighting for us. And most of the time, what happens at the end is not that everything gets, raptured and that everything gets restarted, but that this is when people get to come back to life, when we get resurrected. And that's why human body is important, because it's not just a spirit world, that it is actually a physical world here too. So it's more like, as I've told fans of science fiction, it's more like River World from Philip Jose Farmer, the River World resurrection of people, which it's kind of scary too, by the way. But
what about the whole Star Trek, alliance? Have scholars,
you're very close to that's one of the things that we like part of us, part of our instinct is that with the hope that everyone would one day get together and live in a federation of planets. But on the other hand, there's a fear of that. And look, some of the newer Star Trek
assimilated.
Yeah, so the Borg is the opposite, is the other side of that. And there's been even versions of the Federation of Planets that you can see that in some of the other Star Trek stories that there's a danger to that again, that
the bad guys could just grab the whole thing from the top.
Yep. And so that's been treated in the Star Trek world. I will say I'm not as, I've kind of, I can't follow everything.
Been out of it for a while.
Yeah,
so
I can't follow all of it. Though my daughter, it's funny, my daughter Rachel is working for Paramount Plus, and so she was not into the Trek stuff so much, but she's now working for it, and so she has to familiarize herself with it because doing Discovery, and they're doing some other. There's a cartoon version of it, and there's I mean, there's a whole bunch more stuff coming out, but yeah, they have touched on it, because we really do have this very fine line between, can we create a united, a true united nation, or is what we're going to create going to be the vehicle for that too? And look, it's good that science fiction treats it. The Midrash treats it. The Midrash treats it in a way that, again, they knew it from it, which was the Roman experience. And generally speaking, all of these empires were united by brutality and the fact that it's only through military force that you can do this. So, who knows? I mean, I have that dream, but I also realize, like, can that ever really happen? And again, look, if you really want to, I think all of us felt this way this last week as we watched Afghanistan fall. Like, what are legitimate ambitions for nation building? What are legitimate? I mean, where can we even go for like, what do we do? I mean, what are the limits of our willingness to try to do this? Because we were really, I mean, I thought about this last week. I mean, we're really motivated by high idea. I mean, at least I was. I mean, I think a lot of people were hoping that, Afghanistan would be safe for someone like Malala. But, I don't know. What are the, again, you clearly can't do it through an army, even the best army in the world. So there is a real feeling about this right now. How do we achieve this vision of a world in harmony? So
we can't even do that in our own country.
I don't think I think we may have to evolve a bit, because I was watching some show about archaeology. They were excavating in South America, and they didn't know what they were excavating. They knew it was a big complex, but they didn't know what kind. And they said, the way that archaeologists know they've found a city is there's evidence of social stratification. And I thought, oh my God, there's no way to have a civilization without inequality. We're stuck.
Well, all of these wonderful ideas and these thoughts of history, and whether you can unite people or whether we're constantly in a cycle, all of this, by the way, is about to be brought to us. And I hope it's good. But the Foundation trilogy is coming out, and it looks wonderful. It's going to be on Apple. So I'm hoping that they're, who knows? It's such a difficult series, Isaac Asimov's series from the 50s, which really dealt with what we can
chaos theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of at the root of it is whether we can create a society that can we create stability, and can we create
stability without tyranny?
Yeah. And so these issues are about to, I hope they're good. And it's hard for me I saw a 3-minute trailer, but wow, it looks really good. And it's going to be a really hard series to bring to life, because it's really hard to even describe what goes on in them. But it is one of the classics of science fiction, and it's so classical that no one's been able to turn it into a good movie yet. So
how do you turn a 3,000-year saga into a movie?
It's gonna be tough. I think it's had a huge effect on the way people have, whether it was Gene Roddenberry or any of the people who created, or my guess is even George Lucas, is whether, what kind of effect it had on people. But again, without actually being able to visualize it, which is, by the way, what Midrash does all the time. Most of Midrash has never been brought into a visual medium. Some of it's been turned into art by Christian scholars, by the way, who based it on Jewish Midrash. But for the most part, most of our Midrash has never been, it's all been imagined, and maybe some of it has to be. But yeah, I hope it's good, because it really hasn't had an effect. And by the way, that whole concept of creating stability and order, that is part of what was the background of Star Wars too, of the Star Wars mythology as well. So these are issues that we think about, that we dream about, that our fiction takes us into these directions. And so does, and the Midrash did it a long time ago. It was interesting that the Jews dealt with it even at a time when they were completely powerless. Maybe it really takes a powerless people to theorize what that will be. And again, you can make the argument that, I don't know that Isaac Asimov, I don't know that his Jewish background helped him in that way, but I know he was affected by it. I know that his Jewish identity, even though he was he was an atheist, but I know that his Jewish identity did mean something to him from a cultural standpoint, and I think it did affect his. I think it did affect his, his viewpoint and his kind of, his idea of trying to help people think about the world. And I know he wrote a book. He wrote a series of books. Actually, I wonder if I have them, where he actually assembled Jewish science fiction, and so he was interested. Or I think no, sorry, he wrote the foreword to the book on a Jewish collection of science fiction. So, anyways, these are things we've imagined for a long time as Jews, and I do want to tell you, this is obviously very important for today too, because every American leader has to think about this from a position of power. And I guarantee you, this is exactly what Joe Biden was thinking about last week. What are the limits of American power, even in a positive way? So the Midrash wants to know a very interesting question, because Midrash does not like unanswered and unidentified people. Who's this kid that came up to Moses and told him that there's prophesying going on? Who's the one who came up to him and told him? And so here we have something in the Midrash that we do not have in the Torah.
When Gershon, Moses' son, heard about these prophecies of Eldad and Medad, he hurried to his father and told him of them. Joshua was now greatly agitated about the prophecy that Moses was to die in the desert and that he was to be his successor, and said to Moses, "Oh Lord, destroy these people that prophesy such evil news." But Moses replied, "Oh Joshua, can you believe that I begrudge you your splendid future? It is my wish that you may be honored as much as I have been, and that all Israel be honored like you."
So that's the real issue for Joshua. Joshua is not concerned with Moses. Joshua is concerned with what's going to happen to me. So, and so that's what really is going on with Joshua. But of course, the other thing that the rabbis wanted to let you know was that it was Moses' own son that gets involved here. We don't ever hear about Gershon at all. We don't hear about him in the Torah. We just don't know. And so the rabbis here have him being the kid who comes up to his dad and says, these guys are out there prophesizing. And so kind of helping his dad or defending his dad or concern for his dad. That's why Gershon does what he does. So it's interesting, role that he plays, because we don't know anything about him, and the rabbis don't like that. And they don't like the fact that we don't know who this kid is. So they kill two birds with one stone. Yep.
Eldad and Medad were distinguished not only by their prophetic gift, but also by their noble birth, being half-brothers of Moses and Aaron. When the marriage laws were revealed, all those who had been married to relatives by blood had to be divorced from them, so that Amram too had to be separated from his wife Yocheved, who was his aunt, and he married another woman. From this union sprang Eldad, not of an aunt, and Medad in place of an aunt, so called by Amram, to explain by these names why he had divorced his first wife, his aunt.
So there's a little Midrash in its finest, which is, where did Eldad and Medad come from? So here we have this Midrash that they're actually Moses and Aaron's half brothers. they're brothers. And then these two guys are brothers. So they're, first of all, they're brothers. It doesn't say that in the Torah that they're brothers. And it definitely doesn't say they're Moses' brothers, Moses and Aaron's brothers. But here you have a brother, the brother teams, and they have this holy lineage too. But they're not full brothers, they're half brothers. And so according to this, the Midrash tells us that Amram divorced Yocheved, because the Bible does tell us that Yocheved seems, is his aunt. He's a grandson of Levi, and Yocheved is, according to the Torah, his daughter. So, the Torah says you can't be married to your aunt. Now, the logic would tell us that how are they born that fast? It wouldn't have been born, that quickly.
But of course, they got all their revelations in advance.
Yes. So they must have known this ahead of time. They must have learned this before they left Egypt. But again, the rabbis don't like the fact that these guys come out of nowhere. And I mean, they actually kind of ruin the story a little bit, which is that just two random guys get touched by prophecy. I mean, that's the actual beauty of it. So this is only one midrash. I mean, the other midrash is that these guys don't even want the gift. They're actually like hiding. They don't think they deserve it. But then this other mode, which is that, they're Moses and Aaron's brothers. Of course, they're gifted. So that's the other like way of telling stories, which are people are destined for greatness. And they are born into it, or they're genetically predisposed to it. And then there's this other mode, which is, no, it's just random. And it's crazy how this happens. And they were good people, and that's why they deserved it. And it's not because of their birth. So you get those modes in the Midrash, and you get them in literature, you get them in everything, which is, there's two different ways of telling stories. I like the way that it's just random, or that there is no rhyme or reason for it. People are kind of by circumstance thrust into greatness. There's other ways of saying, again, that people are kind of destined, they're born into it. And of course, that's why they, when you discover who their father really was, then it all makes sense. That by the way is also the, kind of in the Star Wars stories, which are that, of course we have to find out who her lineage is, because it can't be random. She can't have just anybody. That was the argument of what was going to happen with Keely, whatever her name was. That was the argument kind of that went in there. Is this kid, was this young woman really, born into this, or was she just some random kid? So there is that, you have that even in our modern mythology, if you will. So it's different ways of telling the story. So all right, that is the mystery that surrounds those guys, the fact that there's only 4 lines about them in the Torah, that the rabbis really are imagining these great stories about Eldad and Medad. So right after that, we get the quail. So we know that the people complained about it. We get Eldad and Medad, which is why they're connected. It doesn't say in the Torah that they prophesized about the quail, but the next thing is they get the quail. And this is where the stuff goes, they go sideways. Not the only time, but it's one of the times that things don't go right for the people in Numbers.
The prophecy of these men concerning the quails turned out as they had predicted. The quails being, as God had foretold to Moses, no blessing for the people. For God said to Moses, tell the people to be prepared for impending punishment. They shall eat flesh to satiety, but they shall loathe it more than they now lust for it. I know, however, how they came to have such desires. Because my Shekinah is among them, they believe that they may presume anything. Had I removed my Shekinah from their midst, they would never have cherished so foolish a desire. Moses, knowing that the granting of the people's wish would be disastrous to them, said to God, "O Lord, why, pray, do you first give them flesh and then in punishment for their sin, slay them? Who ever heard of anyone say to an ass, here is a measure of wheat, eat it, for we want to cut off your head, or to a man, here is a loaf of bread for you, take it and go to hell with it?" God replied, well, then what would you do? Moses, I will go to them and reason with them that they may desist from their lusting after flesh. God, I can tell you beforehand that your endeavors in this matter will be fruitless. Moses betook himself to the people, saying to them, is the Lord's hand waxed short? Behold, he smote the rock that waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. He can give bread also. Can he not provide flesh for his people? The people, however, said, you are only trying to soothe us. God cannot grant our wish. But they erred vastly, for hardly had the pious among them retired to their tents, whereupon the godless who had remained in the open came down quails in masses as thick as snowflakes, so that many more were killed by the descent of the quails than later by the tasting of them. We scroll?
Yep.
The quails came in such masses that they completely filled the space between heaven and earth, so that they even covered the sun's disk and settled down on the north side and the south side of the camp, as it were a day's journey, lying, however, not directly upon the ground, but 2 cubits above it, that people might not have to stoop to gather them up. Considering this abundance, it is not surprising that even the halt that could not go far and the lazy that would not gathered each 100 core. These vast quantities of flesh did not, however, benefit them, for hardly had they tasted of it when they gave up the ghost. This was the punishment for the grave sinners, while the better ones among them enjoyed the taste of the flesh for a month before they died, whereas the pious, without suffering harm, caught the quails, slaughtered them, and ate of them. This was the heaviest blow that had fallen upon Israel since their exodus from Egypt. And in memory of the many men who had died because of their forbidden lusting after flesh, they changed the name of the place where this misfortune occurred to Kibrot Hata'avah, graves of those who lusted. The winds that went forth to bring the quail was so powerful a storm that it could have destroyed the world. So great was God's anger against the ungrateful people. And it was only due to the merits of Moses and Aaron that this wind finally left the world upon its hinges.
Yep. And that is the version of the story of Kibrot Hava, the place where they ate the quail and got sick. So the Torah tells us in Numbers that this is what happens when they complain about the manna. So we read about that in chapter 11. The people have the gift of prophecy, and then they get the quail. So that's why the rabbis say that they prophesied about the quail. It doesn't really say that, but that's the context. Now, what's interesting about this is that we read about the quail earlier in Exodus, and we read about the people complaining about food, not having food. And then in Exodus, they get quail. They don't die from quail in Exodus. They don't die. They're complaining about it. It's not good. They don't die. Here in Numbers, they die. And in the Midrash version of Numbers, they don't just die from the quail, from eating the quail. They die from the quail falling on them, which the Torah doesn't say. The Torah says they eat the quail and they get sick from the quail.
Well, if you
That's
talk about visualizing, that's a pretty funny image, or it could be horrifying.
Well, it's kind of horrifying but yes, in a Monty Python type esque way, it's kind of, we'd laugh at it. But so the Torah tells us that they ate of it and they died, which, yeah,
Killer quails.
It makes sense. It's bad.
Quails in my yard.
But you eat bad meat and you die. That's makes a lot of sense. That's not a great way to die, and it does, but people died. They died of eating bad meat. You can die of eating bad meat today. But the Midrash goes further and saying that actually more of them died from the quail actually falling on them. So yeah, it's really
When
bad.
they hovered a foot off the ground, so you didn't have to bend over to pick them up.
Yeah. So the quail clearly in numbers is it's a bad thing. And in the Midrash, it gets even worse. And it's not only that, like, the whole thing is bad. The Torah just tells us they ate bad meat and they died. The Midrash goes further. They fall on him, they eat it, it kills them. And then what else happens? The wind that it says brought it to them is a killer wind. It's such a horrible, like, hurricane force wind that it could have destroyed the whole world. And literally, again, Moses and Aaron have to intervene and say, stop the wind, and stop it from happening. So the whole thing is a miracle, but it's a miracle of punishment. It's a miracle. It's a supernatural occurrence, but it's one where, again, things almost go completely crazy. Like, literally everything's going to end in this moment of quail. So again, it's very different here in Numbers than what we get in what we got in Exodus. And I do want to just remind you from the beginning too, is that Moses actually questions this whole logic to God. Why are you giving people food and then killing them? That doesn't make any sense. It's like, who does that? When we punish someone, we punish them. We don't give them a bunch of food and then go, oh, and we're going to kill you. Well, we actually do that now. We give people,
Think of them our last meal.
give them a last meal. Exactly. So this idea is foreign to Moses, but it's not foreign to us in America. This idea that we'd somehow give people a last meal that was tasty, I guess you could say from a Jewish standpoint, it doesn't quite make sense. And if you would also make the argument, it's almost like torture to give people stuff that they want and then kill them. It's not.
Why do we do that anyway?
It is a very weird way of assuaging your guilt that, somehow, but we treated him nice right before we killed him. And there's something weird about it. And the rabbis recognize that. I mean, they recognize, does that? Well, God does it to some extent. And Moses, and so they have this imagined conversation between Moses and God, where Moses says, why are you doing this? And God basically says, well, I'm going to teach them a lesson through this. We're going to see who's good and who's bad here. I'm going to make it easy for them to see. So here, the quail is a great teaching tool. It's a great separator of good and bad. It's Moses, again, learning the way God works and why God has to do this. To some extent, Moses is kind of questioning, what's the logic here, God? Why would you do this? So again, it also gets, I do want to point this other part here too. Tell the people to be prepared for, because my Shekhinah is among them, they believe that they may presume anything. Had I removed my Shekhinah from their midst, they would never have cherished so foolish a desire. There's an interesting logic to that, by the way, if you think about the consequence of that, which is that God is essentially saying, I've created this problem. It's a weird idea, but it is one that I think we think about, especially as parents, which is, did I spoil these people? Did I make them think that things would be easier than they should be? And now this is the consequence of it. I spoiled them. So it's really there's an interesting kind of question here of whether, at least the way the rabbis kind of put it, is did God kind of create this situation by spoiling us? And it's kind of a little bit of like, you know, the kid saying to the parent, well, you gave me everything I asked for, so of course I did this, you know, of course I, you know, decided that I could do anything I wanted or use any drug I wanted, or, you know, of course but of course, you know, God really is kind of not there's really no answer for it, but at least the way the rabbis put it out there, you know, God kind of did this. I mean, God did this by, you know, spoiling the people. So there is that here too. I do want to point out this is in the Midrash, which is the problem that every parent kind of has to face at some point when they say, well, did I enable this? Did I, maybe I am to blame for being so good, you know, to them. So it's a pretty wild Midrash. So we're gonna read this last section, which takes us into Numbers chapter 12, which is a really difficult part of it's a very difficult part of the Torah, because it kind of sets up a bad scene, which is that Moses' own family turns on him. There's a real question whether, I mean, you could make the argument from the structure of the way the Bible goes out, that this incident that we read in Behalotcha of Moses and Aaron coming against their brother, does this actually create all the bad stuff that follows in the book of Numbers? I mean, does everything emanate out of this problem, which is that Moses has a problem with his own family? And this happens immediately after this Kibrot Hatava, this place of the craving, the people who died of their cravings. And the Torah literally says the meat was still between their teeth, not yet chewed, when the anger of the Lord blazed forth against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. And that's what the words Kibrot, the graves of the graves of craving, is what it means. And that's what Kibrot Hatava means, the graves of lusting or desire. Anyway, so let's take a look here at what happens in chapter 12 when as the Torah tells us, Miriam and Aaron came against Moses.
When the 70 elders were appointed and the Spirit of the Lord came upon them, all the women lighted the candles of joy to celebrate by this illumination the elevation of these men to the dignity of prophets. Zipporah, Moses' wife, saw the illumination and asked Miriam to explain it. She told her the reason and added, "Blessed are the women who behold with their eyes how their husbands are raised to dignity." Zipporah answered, "It would be more proper to say, woe to the wives of these men who must now abstain from all conjugal happiness." Miriam, how do you know this? Zipporah, I judge so from the conduct of your brother, for ever since he was chosen to receive divine revelations, he no longer knows his wife. Miriam hereupon went to Aaron and said to him, I also received divine revelations, but without being obliged to separate myself from my husband. Whereupon Aaron agreed, saying, I too received divine revelations, without, however, being obliged to separate myself from my wife. Then both said, our fathers also received revelations, but without discontinuing their conjugal life. Moses abstains from conjugal joys only out of pride, to show how holy a man he is. Not only did they speak evil of Moses to each other, but hastened to him and told him to his face their opinion of his conduct. But he, who could be self-assured and stern when it touched a matter concerning God's glory, was silent to the undeserved reproach they heaped upon him, knowing that upon God's bidding he had forsworn earthly pleasures. God therefore said, Moses is very meek and pays no attention to the injustice meted out to him, as he did when my glory was detracted from, and boldly stepped forth and exclaimed, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. I will therefore now stand by him.
So here's a very weird midrash, which explains why did Moses have this problem with his siblings? Because the Torah says simply, and I'm going to show this to you. I didn't show you the other part of the Torah, but I am going to show you this part, because I do think it's important for you to read what actually transpires in this story. It's not a very long story. It's chapter 12, and it's not it's one of those stories where there are definitely a lot of details that seem to be, if not missing, then let's take a look real quick. Chapter 12. So again, the place was Kivrot Hatava, the people, it's right there. That's literally the next part of the Torah. Miriam and Aaron spoke out against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married. He married a Cushite woman. They said, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? The Lord heard it. And the next line is, now Moses was a very humble man, more so than any other man on earth. So the Torah tells us of Moses's humility in the next line, which is why that's going to be what we read next. But here's we're gonna finish with this section here today. The Torah is somewhat confusing about what actually happens here. So it says that that they spoke out because of the Cushite woman. He married a Cushite woman. Now, some people took from this that they were upset that he married a Cushite woman, that like he should have married an Israelite woman. The rabbis don't actually say that's, at least this in this midrash, this version of it. It has nothing to do with who he married. Not at all. It's the fact that he's not sleeping with his wife. And when they say he married a Cushite woman, it's not that he's married to a woman who's not Israelite. He's married to a woman. He's not sleeping with his wife. And so they're besmirching his honor. They're talking about his private life in a way that they shouldn't have. But of course, it gets to the other issue, which is why when it says in the next line, they said, has the Lord only spoken through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? What does that have to do with the Cushite woman? And so the rabbis did something very clever here, which is that they connected them together, which is that they connected them to this idea that Moses didn't sleep with his wife because he was a prophet, and that God told him, you can't sleep with your wife anymore. Doesn't say that in the Torah. The Midrash seems to take it for granted that he didn't sleep with his wife after he gets called to the burning bush, which is not normal. And the rabbis are saying it's not normal. But Moses was an exception. So Zipporah brings it to their attention. Then Aaron and Miriam essentially say, well, wait, we sleep with our spouses. Why is he not sleeping with his spouse? So they connected it. They connected the marriage of Moses, and specifically his conjugal responsibilities, with his prophecy. And they come forward and say, hey, God speaks to us, and we're having sex. So they're basically saying, what's Moses doing here? Why is Moses doing this and we're not? Because again, the assumption here to some extent is they feel a little guilty about it. They feel like, oh, well, maybe we're really not as good as Moses, which of course we know they're not, but now they've just been confronted with it. They've been confronted with it because now they know, assumedly for the first time, that Moses has not been sleeping with his wife for a long time. which they didn't seem to know, which upsets them. Because again, it calls on the question, are we as holy as he is? Very interesting. And again, the rabbis found a way to connect them with this, again, this overarching midrash, which is that Moses did not sleep with his wife for, essentially over 40 years. We don't know how long she lives, but, and also, by the way, in that midrash, the Cushite wife is Miriam, not that she's another wife. Excuse me, Zipporah. Yeah, that is Zipporah. All right, now again, we read the line, Moses is more humble than everybody else, which the Torah tells us at that moment. The Midrash is going to comment on that.
It is quite true that this was not the only occasion on which Moses proved himself humble and gentle, for it was part of his character. Never among mortals, counting even the three patriarchs, was there more meek a man than he. The angels alone excelled him in humility, but no human being. For the angels are so humble and meek that when they assemble to praise God, each angel calls to the other and asks him to precede him, saying among themselves, "Be you the first, you are more worthy than I."
So angels are always going, no, you go first. No, you go. No, I insist you go first. So that's what angels do. They never go first. That means they're like paralyzed. Everyone's sitting there going, no, you go first. So no one ever actually goes first. But yes, angels are they're the most humble. And again, even compared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there was something different about Moses's humility. He was even more humble than them. And no human has been as humble as him. What makes Moses a legitimate leader? What makes him special? His humility. That's why he was called in the first place. All right.
God carried out his intention to uphold Moses' honor. For just as Aaron was with his wife and Miriam with her husband, a divine call suddenly reached Amram's three children, one voice that simultaneously called Aaron, Moses, and Miriam, a miracle that God's voice alone can perform. The call went to Moses also that the people might not think that Aaron and Miriam had been chosen to take Moses's place. He was ready to hearken to God's words, but not so his brother and his sister, who had been surprised in the state of uncleanness and who therefore, upon hearing God's call, cried, "Water, water," that they might purify themselves before appearing before God. They then left their tents and followed the voice until God appeared in a pillar of cloud, a distinction that was conferred also upon Samuel. The pillar of cloud did not, however, appear in the tabernacle, where it always rested whenever God revealed himself to Moses. And this was due to the following reasons. First of all, God did not want to create the impression of having removed Moses from his dignity and of giving it to his brother and sister. Hence, he did not appear to them in the holy place. At the same time, moreover, Aaron was spared the disgrace of being reproached by God in his brother's presence, for Moses did not follow his brother and sister, but awaited God's word in the sanctuary. But there was still another reason why God did not want Moses to be present during his conference with Aaron and Miriam. Never praise a man to his face. As God wanted to praise Moses before Aaron and Miriam, he preferred to do so in his absence.
So again, these brothers and sister, they're all special. But again, Moses is different. And this is what we see in this story, is how Moses is different than Aaron and Miriam. They're not the same. And so when it comes time for these two to be called out, it's a big deal, because they are, on one hand, they made a mistake. They are, on one hand, like Moses, part of that special family, but they've got to be now dealt with. And so they're going to be punished. But on one hand, Moses is not going to be there for their talking down, if you will. They're talking to, they're being upbraided, whatever you want to call it. They're going to get in trouble. God's done kind of with their lack of humility and their attack on Moses. Again, we know what's going to happen, which is that this, you can make the argument, it's going to be like one thing after another now. And this is, I mean, the people have already complained. That's true. But the difference of Moses losing the ability to lead to some extent starts now. This is where Moses's credibility to some extent starts to fall apart. There's a great takeaway from this, which is an interesting one. Some would say it's dysfunctional, but there is a mode of leadership where leaders, parents, people of authority don't say good things to a person in front of them. The rabbis just said, we don't praise a man to his face. It means partly for their ego, so that their ego doesn't get bigger, but also, again, because there is this kind of idea that, people will get to, they'll get too used to it or dependent on it, and will constantly need that reinforcement. It's more of my modern take on it. There's also, of course, just this dysfunction of not ever saying you're proud of your child. You tell everybody else you're proud of them, but you don't tell them, which is kind of a weird thing that happens. But there's also maybe this new way that we've gone where we praise people for things that they become so dependent on praise that
No participation trophies.
It's been said so many times. I had a discussion with one of my millennial daughters yesterday about it. And I think, that's where I become the curmudgeon, where I tell them that's all you millennials need is constant praise. So, so this is I'm trying to help them, but I praise them a lot too. So that's also, I may be part of the problem, but yes, we have a tradition in Judaism of not, and again, it might be dysfunctional, but that we also should be careful about praising them directly in front of them. So that's the line, never praise a man to his face. So let's finish with this last paragraph, and then we're going to finish. And I actually, as you can see, I'm dressed very casually today because I'm going for an MRI on my neck. I'm fine, by the way, but I have to do this in order to justify the weeks of chiropractic care that I've had on my neck and back. So I am feeling, and I think I have it for at least another couple weeks. So anyways, but nobody likes to get MRIs. It's not one of those color contrast ones, so I don't have to worry about that. But all right, I'm going to go right by Judith's house for my MRI. So anyways, we'll read this last paragraph and then next week we'll read about Miriam's punishment. As you notice, it doesn't say Aaron's punishment. It just says Miriam's punishment. That's the Torah once again, letting Aaron off the hook, but we'll get to why next week. All right, here we go.
Hardly had God addressed Aaron and Miriam when they began to interrupt him, whereupon he said to them, "Pray contain yourselves until I have spoken." In these words, he taught people the rule of politeness, never to interrupt. He then said, "Since the creation of the world, has the word of God ever appeared to any prophet otherwise than in a dream? Not so with Moses, to whom I have shown what is above and what is below, what is before and what is behind, what was and what will be. To him have I revealed all that is in the water and all that is upon the dry land. To him did I confide the sanctuary and set him above the angels. I myself ordered him to abstain from conjugal life, and the word he received was revealed to him clearly and not in dark speeches. he saw the divine presence from behind when it passed by him. Wherefore then were you not afraid to speak against a man like Moses, who is moreover my servant? Your censure is directed to me rather than to him, for the receiver is no better than the thief. And if Moses is not worthy of his calling, I, his master, deserve censure.
Wow. So here, first of all, we don't have anything in the Torah that they interrupted God. It says the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud, stopped at the entrance of the tent, and called out Aaron and Miriam. The two came out, and he said, "Hear my words. When a prophet of the Lord arises amongst you, I make it known a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not with my servant Moses. He is trusted in my household. I speak to him mouth to mouth." And
so God is telling that mouth to mouth, this isn't a dream, right? So,
well, however, the Torah does give us this. Yes, the Torah does give us this, though. He's that God's in the pillar of cloud. And the rabbis want to remind you that this is not the way God would normally come to Moses, which is why Moses can't be there. Because if Moses now speaks to God out of the pillar of cloud, then he's just like everybody else. So, well, he is speaking to them. So it's not like that most people see the most people
telling them, I don't speak to people like
I don't speak to people like you. It's like, yeah, but I will speak to you out of the cloud, but you won't get to see beyond the cloud. You don't get to see God. Moses experienced me in a way that no other human being did. So speak to you out of the cloud. And by the way, Moses isn't going to be here because I don't talk to Moses in a cloud. And so Moses isn't going to be here when I'm in a cloud. It seems like a little bit of an extreme version of this, but it does say that God came down in a pillar of cloud. So this is why we can have this midrash, because it does say that Moses isn't there and that God is in the cloud at the time. So this is kind of, again, accentuated the difference between the way Moses speaks to them, to God, and the way they speak to God. What's wonderful about the way that God phrases this is he scares the hell out of them, because he says, you're not attacking Moses, you're attacking me. So don't think that you're speaking against Moses. I'm the one who set this up. It's my decision. I'm the one who I decided the way I'm going to speak. And so you're attacking me. So this is where Moses, this is where Aaron and Miriam are like, oh, what did we just get ourselves into? We really, really stepped in it. And what's interesting about it is, again, even before, and we're going to read next week about the punishment, even before they hear what the punishment is, they know things are going to be very hard on them because God has taken it personally. This is and again, the rabbis essentially have to set this up because the rabbis are aware that from now on, Moses will have nothing but problems with, attacking his leadership. It'll be his cousin Korah. It'll be the rest of the people turning on the spies. Everything that happens from now on is going to be a problem for Moses, and it is literally a crisis of leadership that, to some extent, and the rabbis are recognizing here, starts with what Aaron and Miriam do in this moment by attacking him. And again, the rabbis are very clear. It was just there kind of briefly, but I do want to call your attention to it before we wrap up. People are not supposed to be not having conjugal relations. That's a special. I ordered him to abstain, and this was me speaking to him. This is not a normal type thing. I don't do that. That's not the way people are supposed to be. This is a special situation. So your issue about him, abstaining, that was me. That was a once in a lifetime thing. This is no other person's like this. So next week we're going to.
Rabbi, I have a quick question.
Yep.
And I hope it's quick. It has nothing to do with what we've been reading, but it has to do with the rabbis that we always refer to, Akiva, Hillel, etc. What did they call themselves back then?
Well, by Akiva's time, they called themselves rabbis.
They did.
Yeah.
What about Hillel's time?
And by the way, we know that they're called themselves rabbis because Akiva, by the way, lived 70 years after Jesus, and they call Jesus a rabbi. So we know that that term is being used pretty frequently. The rabbis really start calling themselves rabbis from the period of about 100, let's say 150 at most BCE. So before that,
so Hillel was called a rabbi then.
yeah, they were not called, they were not called rabbis before that. They were called, for a time, they were called Sophorim, which are Sophrim, the scribes. So before that, they were called scribes. During that seems like a kind of proto-rabbinic time when they were not quite rabbis. But yeah, the idea of calling them teachers or rabbis and having those people be the leaders, again, it overlaps with the priests for about 200 years. There's both rabbis and priests, and they don't always get along. They seem to have different political patronage, and like, King Herod likes priests, he doesn't like rabbis, and he kills a whole bunch of them. So there is definitely, rabbis were not fond of King Herod or his family.
Then there was another term I read called Tannin.
Tanaim. So the Tanaim are those early rabbis, or those are the rabbis that are that first 6 or so 7 generations from about 150, some say 200 BCE, let's say 150 BCE to about 150 to the time of Akiva. So Akiva's generation are the last, they're the last Tanaim. Those are the first generation of rabbis. They're the ones that are quoted in the Mishnah. So if they're quoted in the Mishnah or they're from that time, they can be called Tanaim.
Gotcha.
If they're not in the Mishnah, or they're after that period of time, which again, the Mishnah was finished around 200 of the Common Era by Judah Hanasi, one of those rabbinic dynasties, part of the Hillel dynasty. Mm-hmm. When he closed off the Mishnah, none of those rabbis after that are called Tanaim.
And Gamliel is also part of Hillel, right?
Yep, he was. He's part of the family. Yeah, he's part of the Hillel family. Yeah, there was actually 3 Rabbi Gamliels that we know of, 3 different, grandparent, great grandfather.
Right.
So they went between the names of there were other Hillels, there were Gamliels in that family, and there were Judahs. And one was the father, when there would be a Judah, and then there was a Hillel and a Gamliel. Those are the family names in that family. So yeah, that was a dynasty that lasted for a really long time, and again was responsible for preserving Jewish knowledge and was powerful by the time of Judah Hanasi. Bless you. He was kind of a ruler in his own way. I mean, as an own political leader. All right, folks, I will be heading out, and hopefully again see you all real soon. It's time to start wishing people a happy and healthy new year. Have a happy and healthy new year. And everybody, thank you, Rosemary, for reading, and stay healthy, everybody. Please stay good.